morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is the High Dragon's Breath. Bow wow. Coming back at you with another instance of Archon's Armies this time. This will be one of the longest videos, hopefully, that I have ever done. This is the Chaos Cultist Armies video. Highly requested, and ending with a special poll for all of you in the community tab. So, stick with me, stick your headphones in, paint your armies, and let's get moving. Now, the Mythos. The real disambiguation that we're going to do here is, what is the Cultist army? How does it work? What is its general function? What is its general feng shui, so to speak? How does it portray itself? And, of course, what are the standout examples and the differences from other cultists and other forces? So, the Mythos starts off with masses of unwashed mutants, madmen, and monsters. Now, this will be something that we go into when we talk about forces, but a lot of the time, the image that Imperial propaganda creates of chaos cultists are these kind of unwashed, hooliganish, rioters or violent, vile mutants who have rebelled against the Imperial way and hate the God Emperor, and they are the vile heretics that they are. Now, I think we all know that Imperial propaganda makes a great deal of decisions and opinions that are not held up by the people that they are saying mean things about. For example, I severely doubt that most cultists would consider themselves insane. Though the madness is not uncommon in truly chaotic forces, a vast majority of chaos cultists are not absolutely crazy. A vast majority of them start off as revolutionaries, religious saints, and various levels of self-righteous warriors. Though they can delve into both mutation, madness, and monstrosity every now and then, it tends to be a slippery slope rather than an automatic assumption. Terrible leadership and loyalty. This really has an issue with one of the main things about this video. Now, a lot of people were asking me about warband cultists, which is just going to be how I refer to cultists that are attached to a Chaos Space Marine force. Because, a lot of the things that we know about Chaos Cultists come from these forces. They have the ultra-elite Chaos Space Marines on one end, and then their, vast majority of their force by numbers is actually just cultists. Poorly equipped, poorly armed, poorly trained, and really just thrown in so that the Marines don't have to do all the work themselves. And this is really where this, I say, semi-myth of terrible leadership and loyalty comes from. Naturally, if you take a man, any man, Chaos or Imperial, and you give him nothing to fight with, nothing to fight for, and nothing to live for, he's not going to be a very, self-leading, motivated, and loyal soldier. He's going to run at the first opportunity, he's going to flee, he's going to try and surrender, and most importantly, he doesn't really believe in the cause he's fighting for. This applies with a lot of Marine, Warband, or Marine-adjacent forces. So we're going to talk about some of these when we get to the standout examples. But I am divorcing cultist armies from warbands in this because I'm not including Xenos, which can be on the Chaos side. I will talk about them at a certain point in the future when I talk about warbands and how they function. But I'll be leaving out Chaos-aligned Xenos. I will be leaving out Chaos Space Marines because while they do play an integral role in some Chaos armies, they also negatively affect their own armies. So forces of Chaos Space Marines have a vested interest, if they're not, well organized and well indoctrinated, to keep their cultists poorly armed and armored. Essentially, they want to intentionally weaken their cultists so that there's no chance that they could try and escape, or attack the Marines, or really even resist them in any way. So they have kind of that dual purpose of being meat shields, but also being a method by which the Chaos Space Marines can control the mortals in their own host. If they're terrified of the Marines and they have no way to resist, they're not going to defy them. so in such a way, having Marines in charge of a human host, in terms of chaos, can actually damage their morale more than just having humans leading humans. I will also be I will be referencing demons on occasion, but the discussion of demons will be left a majority out of this video. We will discuss mutants and possession for a short bit, but as they're not universal in cult armies, and as they tend to be kind of fire and forget weapons more than they are consistent sections or divisions of an organized cultist force, they also fall under that less good leadership, or, on occasion, insanity can also give you very good leadership. If you're too crazy to understand that you're going to die by attacking somewhere, that is technically good leadership by a definition. Worthless chaff. Now again, we come back to the idea of if a man isn't well led, if he isn't well equipped, if he's been intentionally brought down to a lower level of readiness and training by his overlords, or in search of some secondary goal, like, not being all that important for a true warfare scenario, but being more a chaos police force, an enforcer force, a corrupted gang, or something of that nature. That's going to be the spot where you see worthless chaff. Like, people like these gentlemen, who are kind of, not the one in the middle and not the one in the front, but you can see this dude has just a knife. This guy has 2 knives. But these 3, you can see they're true cultists. You can see some body armor here. Clearly he's holding some sort of bolt weapon. This gentleman has a pistol and full body armor. And this gentleman clearly has one of the fancy cultist hats, which are pilgrims' hats. We'll talk about that in a bit, how cultists use religious iconography from the Imperium as religious iconography from Chaos. This is a classic example where you have a pilgrim's or a false cardinal's hood that he's put on top of his, like, frayed stormcoat, and he's put a Chaos star on it. So they will often take Imperial symbols of religion and swap them around and kind of hoodwink them or corrupt them to the use of chaos. And this gentleman also is clearly a leader, because look at him. He's got pendants, he's got shoulder plates, big cloak probably taken from a commissar, giant sword cleaver thing, and what might be an old-fashioned bolt pistol or bolt gun, or more likely just an auto gun. Actually, I think that might be an old-fashioned bolt gun. So you're just going to see worthless chaff mixed in with the actual cultist, and we'll make the distinction later. Uniform ununiformity. That's a little bit of a phrase that I'll be using a lot. You can see here all of these gentlemen, their colors are pretty obvious, right? They're all in black and red. They all have a Chaos Star or some modification of it. They're all equipped with similar weapons, obviously of the same kind of pattern if there's some modification. But nobody would say that these guys are in any type of uniform. So when I say that they are uniformly, they're going to be in colors, they're going to be bearing icons, it's going to be obvious who's a Chaos Cult soldier and who's an Imperial soldier. They're also absolutely ununiform in terms of their equipment and such. And then we have a lovely meme here about guardsmen, officially superior to cultists in every way. So all of this is lovely Imperial propaganda, and I'll go through right here. Equipment: efficient, standardized, STC-compliant equipment, including the blessed lasgun for the guardsmen. For the cultists, the motley assortment of poor quality, hive-made weaponry, like autoguns and stubbers. This is very dismissive. But again, we've done videos on the lasgun, on stubbers, on autoguns. There's pros and cons to both weapons. Motivation: needs only a single steely glare from the commissar to leap into action. Requires endless litanies, speeches, and threats from nearby firebrands to act. And this is another one where we talk about loyalty and drive. Now, I have no question as to the Imperial Guardsman's drive to do his duty. He signed on, he's given his life to the Imperium, he's well trained, he's very well indoctrinated, but he is but a man. He is a human being. A cultist is also a human being. Now, when it says only needs a single glare from a commissar, that is the discipline of the Imperial Guard. That is structured, that is organized, it's regimented, and it is really punitive. It is a system of discipline that relies on punishment for bad behavior and either acknowledgement or limited reward for good behavior. So it is far more on the punitive side, on the disciplinarian side, on the restrictive side, whereas the cultist, he doesn't respond as well because of his individualism to disciplinarianism. Now, obviously, there is discipline within Chaos ranks, and it ranges from, actual punishments, being stripped of arms and armor, being forced to do manual labor, that kind of thing, to just getting shot. That is, not an uncommon thing within Chaos armies to just, you defied a superior officer, you endangered the mission, you're a threat to the overall force, they're going to put you down. But that's not a bad side of the Chaos forces. The Imperium does that too. The meme about commissars committing the Emperor's justice on open battlefields doesn't exist for no reason. They absolutely will kill soldiers who are unwilling or unable to carry out orders. Cultists, their support for morale, the litanies, speeches, and threats from nearby firebrands, this is based on that human element. They are individuals. They came to this conflict with a goal. They aren't like the guardsmen who've traveled over a dozen planets away and spent years in space just to go fight on a planet that they have no connection to. A lot of cultists, this is their homeworld, or one very close to it, one that they've made their home on. They are fighting alongside family members, friends. They're fighting with people they worked with, in places that they love and work for. They have put a lot of effort into this whole cult thing, unlike the guardsman who essentially shows up to the battlefield and is expected to be a soldier, because that's his job. A cultist is a soldier, in this case in the army, but he is also a man. He does respond well to inspiring speeches. He responds well to litanies, to prayers to the gods that he's adopted. It is a very strong morale booster to have leadership nearby to cultists, and they can almost be as unbreakable as certain guard regiments if their demagogue or their firebrand is right in there with them, because that's the guy we're fighting for. I'm fighting for the embodiment of my faith standing next to me. No way am I going to turn tail and escape right now. I will fight anything. And sometimes this is, into the level of insanity. I'm going to charge that Ogren over there. I'm going to punch a space marine. Sometimes cultists make bad decisions because they're inspired, but the fact is, you would never in a million years get a logical, not fired up, run-of-the-mill guardsman to go do the insane things that cultists will do on a pretty regular basis when their leadership is on the field. Demeanor shows scowling, brave face to the world in defiance of errant shrapnel or the enemy. Wears mask to hide ugly, mutated features. Now, this is another one. I've talked about Chaos using masks before, and how it not only saves a lot of, the trouble of having to draw faces, and, paint faces if you're doing 40k models, but also it isn't just for this reason. It isn't just to hide their face. It is often a mark of privilege, or a mark of distinction, or even a part of that uniform ununiformity. If everyone is wearing a mask, the Sons of Sek do this, where they have skinned human hands that they put over their mouths to show their loyalty and to show deference to their leadership. The Blood Pact obviously have this with the iron grotesques that they wear over their faces, representing the face of their demagogue. And, even this gentleman here, you can see the uniform, right? You can see the curved hat, the kind of pseudo-religious aspect that he's got, the dangling charms. All of this is pedantry. It's paraphernalia. It's all this panoply of war that the cultist brings with him. Not only does it serve a dual role, obviously, like, this helmet, it does protect his face from shrapnel. It does protect him from, stray las pistol blasts, or some random thing that might mess up his face or kill him instantly. This does protect him more than the guardsman's helmet, even if this is armored flak and this is just steel. It is something. We dealt with having steel helmets forever in our modern world. We still have steel helmets in some militaries. It's not an unreasonable thing to say that a lot of the kind of janky, unusual things in the Chaos Army serve a dual purpose. And you can also see it here with this lacquered armor plating. Is this a ceremonial set of armor worn by the enforcers of the demagogue? Probably. Is it also just armor and keeps him from getting shot in the chest and dying instantly? Yeah. Yeah, it is. It serves two purposes. Appearance. Dresses modestly in highly protective war gear. And then the cultist dresses in vain and unruly fashion, foolishly forsaking a shirt. Now, this is really funny. I like this idea a lot. The idea that the guardsman, in his flak weave and all his protection, is dressed modestly. He's in uniform, and that makes him disciplined and impressive. A uniform doesn't make you disciplined. A uniform doesn't make you perform better. A uniform is a uniform. It makes you look like everyone else. The cultist is an individual. He is an individual soldier. He is out for the cause, but he's not out for the cause because he was necessarily recruited into it. Of course, you can be strong-armed into being a cultist, but a large number of them, once they get in, or even at the beginning, they could be getting into it because they want to get into it. They truly believe. And true believers, they're not too worried about looking like everybody else. You know, maybe this gentleman doesn't have a shirt. Maybe he's got a tank top under there. Maybe he just decided that he wanted to show off the guns, man. Like, there is a lot of cultists, you can see with this gentleman here, throwing up the biceps, letting him see the triceps. That's intimidating. You know, if you run up against somebody and you're both out of ammo and you gotta go into a fist fight, I'd rather punch the guardsman in the face than tangle with Mr., Python biceps over here who's about to punch my face in with the power of corn. So, it's both an individualism thing and just a fact of, why not? Why waste the resources to make a uniform when I work just as good without it, and it can be an intimidation factor? And in some cases, it even reveals things. Tattoos, mutations that are blessings in their eyes, all types of things. And of course, making a uniform for every cultist, that can sometimes be difficult considering the vast variety of shapes and sizes that cultists come in. The reality of cult armies. The origins. I know this is a Warhammer Fantasy meme, but I really like it. It's, dang, man, that Chaos Army is surprisingly well organized. It's another reference to how we'll be talking about Chaos Armies in this video, and not just rabbles of Chaos, cultists. They're not just garbage units. We're talking about actually organized resistance here. Origins. Militant. Militant really has two origins. One, there is a local army or a planetary defense force that is infiltrated by Chaos Worshippers, and enough of them become Chaos Worshippers that they, as a whole, can flip the rest of the force. And the other side of this is ones that result from Traitor Guard regiments. Traitor Guard regiments are rarer. They tend to result from a cult being in combat for a long time with Chaos forces, or being in an unwinnable situation where they're forced to submit. There are situations where regiments will get corrupted from the inside out. The Mobian 6th, as far as I know, are a pretty good example of this. There are some regiments that get corrupted really quickly. There's some sections of regiments that go rogue. All that type of stuff can happen. And that will form a militant cult, where the regimental officers and the regiment itself will form a elite core within a cult that then spreads out and includes more and more forces as the cult grows in size. But that is a little bit rarer and tends to be a lot more individual. Like, oh no, a regiment went rogue and they joined so-and-so a force. Or they went rogue and then all the other regiments around them fought a bloody battle to kill them all. And then the other side of militant, going back to it, is traitor PDFs and local armies that go rogue. Traitor PDFs, because the PDF recruits from the local world, vast majority of the time, they are susceptible to chaos cultists that exist within the world, and a lot of Imperial worlds have chaos cults. It's just a fact of life. They're everywhere. It's hard to get rid of them permanently, because, people have religion, and we'll talk about chaos and how deceptive it can be when, a cult kind of mixes and mingles with the population. Are they religious, or are they heretical? Are they just really outspoken about politics, or are they heretics? Are they super into this whole philanthropy thing, or are they trying to turn people against the government? This can become a massive gray area that cultists basically use all the time to set up shop and organize a way to get themselves and their members into areas where they can secure weapons and equipment and training to take over the planet. So, those militant sides. If you have a PDF or a local army, they might have a leader or an individual who is in charge of it, who's, running the whole show. They might be the only one who actually knows that they're a chaos force. They might not have spread the chaos theology that far. They're just maneuvering their military force slowly and in ever-increasing amounts towards war with the Imperium on the side of chaos. So that's the 3 types of militant. There are other types, but we'll go into them in a bit. The true blue, out-of-nowhere militant cults like the Blood Pact, where they've been around for millennia, but they really just rise up and manage to get meteoric rise off of being so militant. Religious is the next one, and I would actually argue that religious cults are the most common in the Imperium. Because they start from humble, or at least from good intent origins, philanthropic movements, people who set up soup kitchens, people who set up hospitals, people who set up shrines and churches and nursing services, all of these groups and organizations can be the fronts for chaos forces. Now, religious groups, in terms of forming an army, militant groups have an advantage in that they are trained and they have access to weaponry and they know how the security on the world works, and they can pretty much get themselves in a position to cause mass collapse or mass casualties within a pretty short amount of time. So their uprising will probably be easier, but it's a little bit harder to pull off because obviously the military gets a lot more oversight than a random religious or philanthropic movement. But the religious cults, they have a bit of advantage in the actual leadership style. So religious cults will often have a demagogue, where militant cults might have a general or a leader who's very militaristic, a super high level commander or something, and they're like, yes, Commander so-and-so, he's awesome. Have you seen how strong he is? I saw him break a man in half over his knee like Bane. And it's like, oh yeah, no, he's literally just a yoked out Cornate follower, and he just wields like monstrous weapons. That's Colonel so-and-so, he's gonna lead us to victory. The religious ones, they'll have men who are very good with words, who are very good religious leaders, and, what is worse, who can really talk their way out of a lot of stuff. Whether it's, they're gifted a silver tongue by Slaanesh, or they're gifted the ability to use incredible machinations, politics, economics, all this different levers and pulleys of the Imperial system, and just jump up and down them to get the result that they want. Religious doesn't necessarily mean that they are false God Emperor worship. That is the most common one. They take the worship of the God Emperor, or of a local saint. It is quite often combined with a local saint, in fact. And then they twist it and modify it slowly and over time to be worshipping a chaos god. So, let's do one for each of the gods. Khorne is easy. You worship the god Emperor as the ultimate warrior. You make statues of him that looks like a very big, bulky, golden space marine. And you worship that, and you pray to that, and over time you go from being, oh, isn't the god Emperor so wonderful? What a great military man, what a great leader, how powerful his arms, how great his armies, to, well, we aren't living up to that level. Shouldn't we be stronger? Shouldn't we be bigger? Shouldn't we be able to, fight for ourselves? Isn't that what the God Emperor did? Shouldn't we want to strive to be like him? And of course then, the golden warrior figure is Khorne. You're worshipping Khorne. You're believing that the God Emperor is this god of war. He's a lord of, all battle. He's a great warrior, and you just revel in his incredible strength. And all of a sudden, you're worshipping Khorne. See how this goes? Let's move on. Nurgle. Nurgle's a little bit harder, but you really have to go into the religious cults built around healing. Healing is the biggest one. Healing and forgiveness. The family. going into the idea of the cycle of life and death. You know, people are afraid of death. They really are. They're terrified of death. The idea that I can vanish off this world and no one will know my name, no one will remember me, my body will be dropped off onto some random cemetery world, and my bones will be used as currency, that's terrifying to a lot of people. They despair over this idea, and from that despair, you can get a Nurgle cult. People who either worship the idea of death, they want to view death as not an ending, but a beginning. They want to strive to live longer, to live happier lives, to give in to the cycle and to give to the cycle in terms of, sacrifice. At first, it's not human sacrifice, it's sacrificing your time, working in the garden, pulling up fertilizer, working at the hospice, helping dead people to move on. Work like a public service job where you're like, I'm going to comfort elderly people or sick people whose time has come, and I'm going to pray, and when I pray to them, I'm going to press a talisman into their hand, and I'm going to say, your great God believes that when you pass on, you will cycle again, and you will be able to come back from this. Death is not the end, my friend. Pray to the grandfather. Wait, did you say grandfather? I mean the God Emperor. Pray to the God Emperor. And that same thing, that duplicitous messaging, mercy, release, forgiveness, family, joining, healing, all of that very easily can go from, well, the God Emperor's mercy, the God Emperor's kindness, his saving of our souls, even though that doesn't actually happen in 40k, his saving of our souls, of our sins. That can become Nurgle worship of the cycle of life and death and the mercy and the suffering of plague very quickly, and you quickly get cults that are like, here, drink this poison or this, noxious, intoxicating fume, and it'll make you stronger. It will inure you to the cycle, and it's what God wants, because of course, why would God make us only to die? We have to search out ways to improve our ability to survive the cycle. That'll happen. Nurgle is particularly mean because it'll go from, yes, a community hospital that serves old people and sick people to, everyone that comes out of this hospital is bearing a new strain of plague and they don't seem to be worried about it. All of a sudden a pandemic locks down the hive, and then when they unlock the hive, they find that everyone is a Nurglite cultist. It's bad. It's really bad. Now, Tzeentch. Tzeentch is difficult. Tzeentch has two kind of avenues that he can go down. The first one is the political one. Again, when I say religious, it's a lot more dogma with Tzeentch. So, a Tzeentchian cult could be a cult of knowledge. A group of librarians organizing, increasing public knowledge. We want to make people more aware of their history and how things work. We want to improve knowledge. And, you might say that's frowned upon in the Imperium. It doesn't have to be technology. It can be the worship of the God Emperor. It can be looking into the history of the grand world that you're on. It could be looking into the history of the Imperium. Not illegal. Not at all. Matter of fact, probably encouraged, because the Adeptus want people to be loyal to the Imperium. So if you're a cult that claims to be doing exactly that, while in reality you're exposing them to certain altered pieces of history, or to real history that has been censored by the Inquisition, that's a problem. And then, of course, Tzeentch cults, the biggest thing is assassination, replacement of people, and putting all of the weight on your side of the seesaw, basically. So, I have dirt on 90% of the politicians on my planet. I know who all of their family members are. I know where they live. I know where they get their food. I can go out and kill 60% of the overall government with like 30 agents in a couple of weeks, and then me and the rest of my really hyper-intelligent cronies, we're going to rise up and be like, alright, we're in charge of the planet. Why? We have the most educated part of the population, and also we have a little military force to boot. So, that's the other thing. Tzeentch cults also tend to appeal to people like mutants, or to abhumans, and be like, the Imperium has treated you horribly. We think that your changes are gifts. We think that change is natural. Things need to change. Of course they need to change. The government needs to change. And that's how you get revolutions up in the Underhive. And then finally, Slaanesh. Slaanesh, again, like a lot of the gods, has two different types of forms here. One side is the debauched side. And I know there's a lot of people who are not big fans of Slaanesh because of this exact reason. But it doesn't have to be debauchery in the way that you think. Slaanesh does appreciate anything that is an excess of human emotion. So, excess of happiness, excess of pain, excess of suffering. Not in the way that Nurgle suffers. It's not eternal suffering. It is acute suffering. It's quick. It's extreme. It's, ooh, ow, pain. It's the whip crack instead of the slow fever. It is the slice of the blade in place of the bursting of boils for Nurgle. So, that's one way. The excess way, where you get clubs and restaurants and food eateries and all other types of clandestine secret party things that are going on, and that's going to be the way that you get people. That's how you corrupt people. That's how you deaden their senses and you make them want more. And then on the other hand, you have absolute perfection. Absolute perfection is Slaanesh's other aspect. The idea that I can make an artwork so perfect that no one could make its equal. I can fight with my dueling rapier with such speed, such grace, such perfection and precision that no one dare oppose me. I am so good, I'm so perfect, I'm so flawless that I've gone far beyond anyone else in terms of my dedication to the craft. And Slaanesh overlaps with a couple of gods in this. The first one is, obviously, Khorne. Khorne is martial pride, Khorne is strength, Khorne is honor to a degree. He has a very messed up form of honor, but we'll go into that if we go into the chaos theology and the ideology. But Slaanesh, it really is perfection in the literal sense. So it isn't like, I can dispatch my opponents with a single hit. It's, I don't need to dispatch my opponents with a single hit. Watch me literally dance around them so quick that they can't touch me and they, pass out from exhaustion trying to catch me. It's that very, I would almost say prideful level of perfection. And that could be the same thing as well. You get the upper population to be like, look how great we are, look how puffed up we are, how good we are at X and Y, how awesome we are. Maybe we don't need the Imperium. Maybe they're holding us back. And bingo bango, Slaaneshi Uprising. The things that occur later will probably not be so prideful, but, at that point, who can really tell what's going on? Bad things all around. Reality of Cult Armies. Oh, sorry, we're going on to... I haven't even finished the origins part yet. My bad. I just got really caught up in religious there. So again, religious, they're going to have morale bonuses. They're going to have advantages of their leaders being not so inherently violent or not so requiring, military success to justify their continued leadership. The religious leader doesn't have to be a military man. If we win the war... great, he definitely was a part of that. He helped plan it. He might have even fought in it, but he doesn't have to be out there on the front lines all the time being Napoleon all the time, like a militant cult will. Dependence, that's where we get into a couple more issues with Chaos Space Marines. So dependent cults are ones that rely upon resources or funding or backup from another organization. Now, this can include ones like the Lost and the Damned, who rely upon just generic Traitor Legions. They work for the Dark Mechanicum. They work for anyone, essentially. They will serve and labor in the name of any Chaos-aligned force. But, as a result of that, they're pretty cheap, and they're kind of cannon fodder. Same thing with the Chaos Cultists who are serving Marines. They rely almost entirely on the Marines for their hitting power. Marines take all of the good weapons, all of the best equipment, and they will either intentionally equip their cultists poorly, or they will, equip them based on what the threat is. If the cultists have, no real chance of coming up against Imperial Guardsmen, they're not going to equip them with rifles necessarily. They might, want to if it's an enemy who's particularly ranged, but you're not going to have an overwhelming advantage because why would they waste the resources? Warbands are very skimpy when it comes to resources because they have limitations in their supply, so why bother equipping the cultists with anything good grade? And then finally, gangs. Gangs kind of come into Chaos Defense Forces, which is a thing that we're going to talk about when we talk about flipping around Imperial resources to work for Chaos. But gangs, they can work on the side of Chaos, they can be corrupted by Chaos, but in general, gangs don't really make up a huge portion of Chaos armies. They're generally less equipped and armed, and while they may have a local advantage in terms of knowledge of, like, the hive, they can move around really well, it's not as if that's something that a cult couldn't learn over the time that they were developing. So, while I want you to keep in mind that they exist as a source of weaponry and, pseudo-mercenaries for a cult army, they don't make up a huge portion of cult armies in general. Equipment. Anything that a Chaos cult can beg, borrow, steal, or design and produce themselves counts as equipment. So you'll see just in this image, discounting the Warhammer Fantasy one, we have a club, an axe, what looks like a steel brick on a stick, and, rebreathers, head masks, shoulder pieces. None of these are standard. None of these are regular. Knives, big poles that have flags on them, little shotguns that are stolen from the Arbites. All of this is kind of scratch-built or stolen. And a vast majority of Chaos Cult equipment is going to fall into one of those categories. It's either going to be, well, we have it around, and in order to make it work for me, I have to modify it a little bit, or that PDF trooper is dead. He doesn't need his rifle anymore. I'm going to use it. So, stolen, or made from scratch. Or at least made using the industry of the world and, with some limitations. Chaos cults don't have a lot of engine seers or tech priests around, so maintaining and equipping forces that need those kinds of people to make the production viable, that might be a limitation for many of them, but a lot of Imperial worlds keep spares. All Imperial worlds, for the most part, will have a planetary defense force with weapons, so if you defeat the planetary defense force, or corrupt them, or change them to your side, or destroy the sitting government and disband the defense force and put your cult in charge of the planet's defenses before you actually declare independence, there you go. You have all of their weapons now. And that's, again, stolen, essentially, with all the backups and all the extra equipment that they had on the production line or in storage. Speaking of which, the stages of a cult's military. Now, we'll talk about the formation and the ideals of Chaos cults later on in another video, but the stages generally go like this. At the very beginning, you will have a core of violent, militant thugs, essentially. People who are loyal to the flag. They might not know everything about Chaos yet, but they know at least that the person in charge of the cult, whoever that may be, the demagogue, the warlord, the military leader, whoever that is, that guy has their back, and they're willing to go to ground for him. They're willing to fight for him, to protect him, to lay down their lives for him. That's kind of that proto-cult, where they're just developing. They might have some acolytes. They might have a large number of, pseudo-cultists where they're not worshippers yet, but they're getting there. We're working them up to the idea. We're working through that origin background to try and get them on the bandwagon, so to speak, before we go turning them loose on any of our enemies. Then the second step is really that stepping into position to begin the uprising. And, of course, the uprising itself. That stepping into position, that intermediary area, is where cults will create underground factories to make cheap weaponry so that they can arm their uprising. They will steal or skim weapons off of existing production. If you're on a production line and you're stealing a little piece here, a little piece there, you'd be surprised how many weapons or pieces of equipment or ammunition you can get if you put a whole bunch of your own cultists into the factory and tell them, hey, every now and then, sneak out with a little piece of a gun. And we'll tell you which ones, or we'll tell you what ammo you need to get, but just sneak it out. A lot of areas they have security for this, but no security system is flawless, and Chaos Cults are, if nothing else, creative and inventive when it comes to arming themselves. Sometimes it's just sharpened sticks. Sometimes it's just bricks or pieces of metal rebar. Or knives, like kitchen knives. That's not an unreasonable thing for a cultist to be like, Uprising starting, I have nothing else, I'm going to grab my butcher cleaver from my kitchen, and I'm going to go run, find a PDF trooper who isn't paying attention, cleave him in the back of the head, grab his rifle, and continue the uprising. We got to take that planetary governor down. And that's the in-between phase, where we've come beyond being an unarmed rabble loyal to the flag. Now we're getting into the earnest, hey, we need to form a military. We got to get everyone on board. How do we arm everyone? How do we equip everyone? Well, we have to skim, we have to talk, we have to make things underground. We have to deal with having subpar weaponry at the start so that we can steal stuff from others. The kind of getting there phase. At this point, your men probably aren't going to be that well trained. They might have a shotgun, but they don't know how to use it. They might have grabbed a couple of melee weapons, but they're not particularly blessed just yet. So they are just people swinging around clubs and mauls and axes and knives and the occasional firearm. That's how you start the uprising, with that equipment. Then we talk about continuing and ending the uprising, which is a very different chaos force. Now, by the continuation, by the midpoint of the uprising, you're going to have a lot of equipment that you've stolen, whether it's from the dead, from PDF troopers, or from storages. There are barracks for the PDF. They have weapons lockers. There are local police forces on many worlds. They will have firearms or melee weapons. People may throw in with you. If you capture people alive, they may turn around and be like, you know what, it's not worth dying or being tortured over. I'm going to throw in with the Chaos Cultists just this once, and I'm going to bring my weapons and my equipment and my training to bear. That happens sometimes with PDFs and local armies, but then at the end of the revolution, at the end of the uprising, after the Civil War is done, now we have an even bigger issue. You have access to all of the equipment that the PDF does. Which means that if you had 100,000 PDF troopers, even if you didn't fight them all, even if you just blitzed straight to the planetary capital and the governor and killed him and declared victory, and the PDF might have given up at that point, they might have said, okay, maybe we can deal with you, or maybe we can't fight you because you're in a really defensible position and you have hostages or something. Whatever reason it may be, if you can end the hostilities quickly and get the PDF or civilian military or anything on your side, or at least not fighting you, you can get access to vast amounts of low-grade autoguns, bolt-action rifles, static firing weapons like anti-aircraft guns. If you manage to storm a starport, for example, you're not only going to have access to the ships that are in it, the civilian aircraft, the heavy haulers, the, freighters that might be there. There's also autocannons on the roof. Strip those off and grab them. That's an autocannon with ammunition and lots of supplies. There's food and weapons and ammo stored within a lot of spaceports. Take that, steal it, use it to finish off the PDF, and begin the preparation to actually rule this world in the name of chaos. And the other thing is, there's ships in there. Strip them of their autocannons. Rip off every firearm that you have access to. Heavy, light, medium, stub pistol. I don't care. Take it. Because every angry hand that turns a barrel towards the Imperium is an extra percentage chance, no matter how minute, that you will actually succeed. And considering how many Chaos Cults die in their infancy before they get to this level that I would call a true military or an army, it is so interesting when they get to this point. Because it's like the equivalent of a 1,000-sided die spinning and hitting the 1,000 mark, 2 or 3 times. It's rare they get this far, it's rare they succeed, and when they do, they get really, really wild really quickly. And this is assuming that they are, proceeding logically and trying their best to take over the planet and not just murder everyone, which is how 40k likes to portray chaos cults, but in reality it's very unlikely that a cult that has that as their object is going to A, attract enough support to actually get to the conquest stage, and B, manage to feed, equip, and design its military competently enough and lead it competently enough to actually win the war. A lot of chaos cults get put down in their infancy, some of them get discovered, some of them rise up too soon, or with too much confidence, or they make a mistake, and then the PDF comes down and absolutely annihilates them. Or the TDF slows them down, and the Astartes and the Guardsmen come down and annihilate them. But we'll go further into that when we talk about other cults. But moving on, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So we talked about the proto-cult, the getting their cult or the intermediate stage, the active resistance or the civil war phase where you're fighting the PDF, and then the conquest stage where you've gained control of some level of the planetary government, whether it's a whole hive you've seized or the entire planet, and you now have access to everything that was on that planet resource-wise, and you could start building a real military, because the Imperium's coming, because you're the archenemy, and they're absolutely going to want to dislodge you. Because any Chaos force that manages to get a hold of all those resources at one time, you can guarantee one of two things. A horrible massacre that leads to some sort of terrible warp anomaly, or demons or something like that, or really bad things, aka, like, mass murder. That type of deal. And, in any case, leaving an archenemy force to fester only makes it stronger, and only makes the forces that you're going to need to dislodge it larger and larger and larger. Even a single planet can offer stiff resistance to an Imperial Guard regiment because of their limited numbers, and, theoretically, if a planet is well defended, like a hive world that has its own orbital weapons, its own shielding, its own protection, and maybe a wall, that's a tough nut to crack for a single regiment, or even a couple of, infantry regiments. You might need an elite regiment and 2 or 3 times as many standard infantry regiments. You might need a siege regiment. You might need something special to come deal with this problem. The good, the bad, and the ugly. So, on the good side of this, this continuum of stages for the military, on the good side, you have truly organized militaries. The ones like the Blood Pact. The ones like the Defenders of Vrax, the ones like the Severan Dominant. They've maintained military organization, maybe in an illogical manner, like, yes, we go by the 3rd Sunday of every month we change who's commanding the unit. That doesn't make any sense militarily, but if it's working and it's keeping everyone from killing each other, in civil conflict or in inter-tribal warfare in Chaos, good deal. If you can keep that together, that's great. And those good forces, the ones that are kind of thinking logically and going through the process as if they were an Imperial force or as if they were a regular human force, and being like, alright, here's where we need to resist, here's where we need to do this, we need to go through the logical process of feeding everyone, protecting everyone, building up defenses, equipment, logistics, all that stuff. That's the best possible situation. The bad is, unfortunately, as you may expect, a lot more common. This is the one where a cult gets in power, and then they kind of flounder from there. They're like, what do we do? What do we do? What do we do? We can't escape. We can't get off the planet. They've blockaded it. The Imperial Navy would crush us if we tried to leave. All of these people need food. How do we feed all these civilians? How do we get them water? How do we get them air? How do we keep the economy running? How do we make sure that everyone has money right now? How can we run the planet if we weren't really planning on it? So, if a cult is wildly successful, and their entire premise was essentially freedom for everyone can do what they want, and it's like, oh, well, now we're in charge. And the enemy's at the gates. Hold up, we need a workforce. And then everyone's like, wait, what? You were supposed to... And then the bad stuff kicks in. That's where the totalitarianism comes in. That's where the hard boot of chaos discipline comes down. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, everyone on this planet is slave labor now. And or food. So that is the other thing. Imperials may eat their dead on occasion. Chaos doesn't even necessarily need to wait until they're dead to begin feasting. So... again, that's the bad side of things, where things were done without a plan, our logical process kind of gets thrown out the window, and as a result, our management and logistics are really bad, and we have to, catch up and learn on the fly how to deal with our own planet that we now control. And then the ugly. The ugly is where the person in charge of the revolution, or the group in charge of the revolution, is genuinely bat crazy. Like, just absolutely insane. Think they're made of glass, covering themselves in entrails, drinking blood all the time. They're insane. They've gone mad. Whatever warp madness drove them at the beginning that made them such a convincing speaker, they're gone. They've lost it. Whatever it was, that may lose them the loyalty of their people. The more concerning part is when the acolytes and the cultists are like, yeah, no, he's still the guy. We absolutely have to stand behind him. And all of his insane requests, like, hey, Demagogue just said we need to go kill everyone who's left-handed. Why? How? How does that serve us? I don't know. He just started screaming about God telling us to do that and throwing things at me. And I'm gonna do it because I think he's talking to God right now, and God wants us to kill everyone left-handed. So, that's the ugly side of things, where they're either crazy, or the much more concerning thing is if they're incompetent. Even in the bad, you can be competent eventually. You can work towards learning how to be an actual military force. And then there's the ones that just don't care about being a competent force, and they throw a bunch of unarmed, spear-wielding crazy people at an Imperial Guard regiment, and then they wonder, why did my fancy military get wiped out? Maybe because you literally don't let them use firearms because you think that they're black magic. Like, the ugly side of this is the point where chaos is getting in the way of chaos. We had a great run, boys. We had a great momentum going in the first half, I'm not gonna lie. But now that we're in charge, I don't think we were ready, and the decisions that we're making are going to get all of us killed. So that's the ugly side of things. The Imperial timeline and storage. These are two that are super important for the reality of cults. The Imperium expects planets to protect themselves from a vast majority of cult uprisings. So, in that proto and intermediate phase, the cult army is probably less than 100,000 men. And, if it is more than that, they're not going to be able to arm all of them. Probably only a small fraction of that are actually armed at the start, and they use that to defeat smaller groups of, Imperial forces and steal their weapons and equipment. Now, all of this process, if the cult isn't caught in the act of being a cult, it can take them a couple years to work up to the point where they're ready to declare victory over the Imperium. Civil wars can occur in the Imperium, and while the Imperium might not care as a whole if the civil wars are actually civil between Imperial citizens and other Imperial citizens, they will care if it's between Chaos forces and Imperial citizens. Because not only does the Imperium, swear that chaos isn't real in a lot of cases, or they swear that it has no power over people, so when it shows up on your doorstep, it's like, wait, they were lying to us? And then the Imperium has to protect you, because otherwise they're showing off that they lied, which can cause a planet to flip to chaos real quick. But they have limitations. The PDF has limitations. We did a video on that. They have, worse weaponry. They have large numbers, sure, but those numbers are used poorly. They aren't very mobile. They're not very flexible in their organization. They might not have great communications or great vehicle support or heavy weapon support. If it's a planet that doesn't have massive defenses, they might just be going out in big knots and effectively be equivalent to most cult armies if they're just a little bit better trained and armed. So, the Imperial timeline expects most Chaos cults to be dealt with by the PDF, because if they're not, there's a pretty solid lag time between the Imperium getting a message from a planet, hey, we're under Chaos attack, we really need help, they're beating the PDF. There's a gap between when that happens and the Guard gets mustered, the Administratum releases supplies, they get enough ships to transport all the Guardsmen, they get enough escort ships to protect that transport, they get regiments that are in the local area, they get Astartes forces that are in the local area, some response force has to be mustered, and then of course transported through the warp. That can take years. Literal years. And if a cult manages to get themselves into a position to actually jump up and grab authority pretty quickly, within a year or so, you can really quickly see how the Imperium is not going to meet a planet in need of assistance in civil war. They're going to meet a chaos-held world that is actively able to resist them with all of the might of the original planet. This can be really problematic if it's a well-to-do planet. Somewhere that produces firearms, for example, oh boy, that's a problem. If you have a hive world with 3 billion people on it, and the Chaos Forces are like, they're so kind as to only recruit as many as 3 million, that's 3 million firearm-wielding lunatics. Even if they're not trained, even if they're not well led, even if they're not all that good at their job, they're going to outnumber 3 guard regiments by a factor of 10 or 20 to 1. And while that is good odds in the Imperial Guard's eyes, it's still a win by attrition type of scenario in many cases. So that Imperial timeline is a limitation on how cult armies form and how good they can get before they have to fight the Imperium. And part of that as well is storage. Now, when I talk about storage, I talk about 2 things. A lot of people wonder, how do planets survive famines? How do they survive if there's a war going on in the system and the local agri-world gets taken and they can't get food? Well, my answer to this would be massive, absolutely enormous storage hubs, a majority of which are located under starports for easy access and transport. But these aren't storages of so much always equipment or trade goods. It's food, it's water, it's fuel, it's ammunition and supplies for the PDF. All of that stuff is going to be stored, and this is a great thing for cult armies because it means even if they get blockaded, even if they get cut off from the rest of the Imperium, they might have a solid, couple of years to get local food production on the move, to start up a system where they, take the bodies of the dead and turn them into food, or any reliability issues that the original world might have had if it was cut off from the Imperium. Chaos will do its best during the period of time that storages give them. If it gives them 10 years, if it's a particularly large, well-supplied world, if it gives them 10 years of PDF supplies, food, and water, they're going to feed the population. Maybe they'll ration it to make it last even longer, but they're going to feed the population. They're going to get them working. They're going to keep them producing equipment for the Chaos Forces, and that's how an army gets big. That's how they get well maintained. That's how they get a lot of weapons that are of good quality, because a storage system effectively allows them to carry out resistance without needing to worry about a blockade, at least for a short amount of time. Now, you might say, well, why not just let them all starve? Answer, there's billions of Imperial citizens down there that you would be letting starve. And while it may seem like a drop in the bucket in terms of human life, what wouldn't be a drop in the bucket would be resettling that planet after that much chaos corruption has gotten into it. If you wait for every living being on the planet to die of starvation, and believe me, the cultists are going to make sure that they die last and hardest, you're going to have literally billions of ghosts, souls, demons stalking around that have been eating people, all that type of stuff going on, and that's a way harder to resettle than just scrubbing the blood off of the streets after a war goes on. So there is a sense of urgency to get the invasion over with so that they can actually get the planet back. The situations in which they really can't get the planet back, that's when we talk about exterminatus and orbital bombardment, and of course just starving them out. But the other thing about starving them out, cultists are not stupid, and they are aware that they need food, ammunition, and water to live. You can recycle water. There's pretty complex systems in the Imperium to make sure that you don't run out of water. But on top of that, most planets have the ability to sustain agriculture at some level. Whether it's hydroponics with algae, which is a very common thing in the Imperium. It's a struggle food for sure, but it's rich in iron. It'll keep you alive. There's probably going to be some deficiencies in your diet, but other than that, not impossible to keep yourself alive with some citrus tablets and some meat or something, so some whatever meat you may be consuming is a cult's own prerogative, and the greens that you can make in the hive itself, they can feed themselves. And to a greater degree, if it's an agri world, Chaos will absolutely make full use of it and start pumping out food and sending it to other Chaos forces, begin storing it, begin despoiling it, and saving it for later. All of that stuff can be used, so starving them out isn't a great option, unless it's a planet that doesn't have a lot of resources and is pretty much totally uninhabitable. Pros and cons of Chaos Armies. I know, I told you, this is going to be a long video, so don't worry, we are just getting into it. Pros and cons. Organization. This is definitely a con. In, I would say, 80% of Chaos forces, the organization is top-down, kind of authoritarian. There is that individualism of, we want you following because of the cause and not because of, I told you so. But once cults get to the size where they're really, spreading outside of the true army, where we're just recruiting people because we need more numbers, at that point, you're gonna need some serious discipline and organization to keep, Joe Schmo who joined up for the fancy gun and the chance to save his country, or whatever he believes in. You're gonna need some discipline to keep him around. So, the organization tends to be totally based on the formation and the force. Like the PDF, you're going to see mass numbers of poorly equipped units and troops, with more concentrated special units. So, when you see, a force of Chaos Worshippers who have special weapons, like plasma guns, like in all of these pictures, it's odd, a lot of them have plasma guns, chain weapons, special melee weapons, heavy armor, hell guns, super nice auto guns, all of that. It's going to be, the division of the elite. It's going to be the bodyguards, it's going to be the true acolytes, the folks who are really Chaos aligned, and not the folks who are just joining in because they have to, or because they think it's the right thing to do, whatever that might be. Numbers. Numbers is definitely a pro. Chaos cults can recruit from all facets of society. Men, women, young, old, sickly, wounded, doesn't matter. They will absolutely conscript you, and they'll find a spot for you. If you, I got both my legs blown off, I was in the war, I got a landmine. Cool. I'm going to sit your wheelchair behind a heavy bolter position, and don't get overrun, because if you get overrun, you can't run away. Pretty good incentive. Another one. Oh, I have a family, I can't serve. Great. We're going to put your family to work with an overseer here. You're going to go to the front lines and make sure that if you die, we kill them, or if you desert, we kill them. So, keeping numbers high is related to organization and morale, but it's also a thing of just, they will recruit almost anyone. Not that that's a great thing, you can't train everyone, so you're going to have a lot of chaff units, but the ones that aren't, oh boy, those guys are pretty darn scary, and I've put up a lot of them over here. You either die a hero or you live long enough to join Chaos. Very true in the case of the PDF, in many cases, and in some training regiments or guard regiments. Training. Cultists, the lower level of cultists, will rarely receive any more training than how to communicate basic things in, a military can't. So, if they're on a defensive world, you see this with the Siege of Rax, they're able to communicate, tell where the enemy are, and give their identification code and their location, but they can't fire direct very well. They can't call in information. They can't really give data analysis or any of that stuff. And even the more advanced Chaos forces, they might struggle with the whole technical training thing. They are fanatics in many cases. They aren't necessarily all the way there in terms of sanity and logic. They don't necessarily have to be a terrifying fighting force, but it can be a flaw in their logic that sometimes they will think of concepts or designs that are abnormal or against the military, against the regular military norms. But, on the other hand, I would call that a plus and a con because Chaos can do stuff that the Imperium doesn't. They will do suicide bombs. They will do all types of different things, like weird combined arms tactics, Ogrins mixed in with humans, mixed in with mutants, all that type of thing, and then they will employ combined arms tactics when available. We have infantry, tanks, APCs, and artillery. They're not going to be super great at coordinating all of those assets. They're not going to be great at using them. They might have some experience, but they're definitely not formally trained most of the time, unless they're a trader regiment or a trader PDF company. But they can do it. They can overcome some of the issues that a trader regiment might have, and while a regiment that joins in and creates a cult around itself, like the Mobian 6th, they have massive advantages. We'll go over that in a bit, at the end of the video probably with standout examples. But yeah, I'd call that a pro and a con. Scratch building of units and equipment, and turning forces to chaos. So, we've already been over scratch building units and equipment, so putting together units that are based on their ability or their capability or their loyalty. So all of the acolytes are going to be together. All of them are going to be with the demagogue to keep him alive or to keep him protected. And then on top of that, all of them are going to get the best weapons and armor that we have available. There you go. We want to keep them alive, we want to keep them effective, and we want to send them into combat over and over again so that they can, hold the line while all of our chaff units are getting chewed up. So, keep the heavy hitters in one area, leave the chaff as effectively fat for the enemy to chew on, while we find a weak spot in their line, flank around them, reinforce the defenses somewhere else, etc. Scratch building can also include stuff that's like not STC compliant, illegal designs, or modifications on vehicles or equipment that is not strictly kosher, like stripping off a Chimera and breaking all of its internals just to put a big old artillery gun on it. And it's like, yes, Chaos self-propelled gun. Mechanicus would be mad, but the Dark Mechanicum, they probably won't care. And if you're working with a dependent warband and you have that technological expertise like the Iron Warriors, yeah, they would absolutely do that. No question about it. They'd probably be all about it, in fact. They'd be like, oh yeah, we definitely want self-propelled guns instead of having static artillery. And, that also comes with ripping guns off of hive walls and removing equipment that was static and turning it into mobile. Or removing equipment that was attached to something, hooked up to a servitor, stolen from a display, any of that stuff, and turning it to your own use. And speaking of turning things to your own use, turning forces to chaos. Now, we talked about infiltrating the PDF and infiltrating local armies and turning them to your side. This also comes in to a degree with chaos theology. There are portions of chaos theology that are very big on conversion. Making Imperial citizens see the light and worship chaos instead of the God Emperor is in many cases the be-all, end-all goal of a cult. Whether it's for philanthropic reasons, like the Blood Pact genuinely do believe that the god of the Empire is misleading his followers, and that they have a mistaken faith. This isn't the true faith. This isn't what humans should be doing. We, as a species, are designed to worship the Chaos Gods. That idea. Or, whether it's a little bit more selfish, like the Black Legion, it's like, no, we're basically gods. Us Space Marines are basically gods. You should be worshiping us and the gods that we worship, and not the ones that you worship, because that one's wrong, and evil, and false. The Blood Pact forces, they see the God Emperor as a god. They call him a god, but they also call him the Deceiver God. They call him the False Faith, the Misleader, the Great Deceiver. They literally call him the ultimate deception. They believe that he's hoodwinked all of humanity into believing in him when they should be worshiping chaos as, is traditional or is the history of mankind. They're one of those original human colonies like Cultists who had chaos theology before the Great Crusade. They were around worshipping the gods long before the Emperor ever came around and unified their solar system and, before the heresy, essentially. And yes, by the way, the Blood Pact are that old. And so are the Colchizian Chaos Worshippers as well. So, the other thing about turning forces to chaos is you can buy cheaply with human lives if you can capture Imperial Guardsmen, if you can surround and force the surrender of Imperial Guard units. you don't want to just bring them away into a camp. You want to indoctrinate them as much as possible and try and force them to join you. Because every ounce of experience, every little lick of skill or training or talent that you can wring out of captive forces, or that you can buy, borrow, or steal by putting your allies in those forces before the Uprising starts, you want to take it. Because if you have a well-disciplined, organized unit of cultists based on the model of the Imperial Guard, they're going to perform like guardsmen. Maybe not on the same exact level if their equipment isn't the same, but look at these guys. Body armor, specialty weapons, all of them have gas masks and hoods, so they're ready to do that kind of stuff. They're all beefy as heck. They all have, a couple special weapons. You see shotguns, you see plasma guns, you see chainswords. This is probably the equivalent of any number of the same number, or any number of Imperial Guard squads or platoons. You want to reach that parity level with the Guard as quickly as possible and with as many men as possible. Why? Because there's a more than likely chance that you're going to be fighting the Imperial Guard. And if your men are inherently inferior, and they feel that way, they feel like, oh man, we're equipped with garbage, we don't have anything, these guardsmen are so fancy, they got all this nice stuff. If they feel that way, it's gonna affect their morale. It's going to weaken the amount of time that they stay in combat, and, of course, knock-on effect, if they run away faster, or if they refuse to fight, you're going to start losing. And if you start losing, cults, they have a hard time coming back from a loss, unless they're really well-disciplined, really organized, or the more common thing is just, the demagogue's got to do something about this. He's got to go out and give a fiery speech. He has to go and pray to the gods. He has to do some sort of chaos ritualism or magic, something to put the heart back in the resistance. That type of thing is why you want to turn forces to chaos, to avoid that eventuality of, weakness. Concentrated elites in equipment and units. We already talked about this. Vehicles, heavy weapons, special weapons. You want them all in units that are meant for one thing. So all the men in the assault unit, a few thousand guys, they have shotguns and plasma guns, or shotguns and hell guns. All the ones that we could steal from the PDF or we found in storage, that's all one unit. We might have a defensive unit that's covering a huge area. Cool. They get all the heavy stubbers and heavy bolters. They're a line holder unit. They're designed to do this. It isn't like the Imperial Guard, where they all have standard kit, giving them a second or a backup weapon, something to use, or all having grenades. It doesn't work like that in Chaos Forces. If you have a job, you're going to be equipped to do that job. You could do other jobs. Obviously, an auto gun works just as well on the defensive as it does on the offensive, but your heavy weapons, your special equipment, your melee weapons, that's going to be concentrated into units that are more elite, expected to use them multiple times, go back into combat after they've been injured or wounded, or, I've been in 5 battles today, you're sending me back out? Yeah, man! I gave you light carapace armor and a plasma gun. You need to be on the front lines right now. I need you out there. And that's the idea. Those elite units, they're not going to get a break once the fighting starts. It's going to be, alright guys, everybody, we got a 10-minute break, inject some combat stims, drink your coffee, and then head back into the breach. We're going to go crush the next guard regiment we run into. And then variety of units and assets. So concentrated elites, I would put as a total pro. Scratch building, that's a pro and a con. Mostly a con, because a lot of the time it's going to be disadvantageous. Turning forces to chaos, apart from the, moral value, it can kind of be a pro and a con, because, having a lot of prisoners, con. Having a lot of prisoners who have good training, and you can use them to please the gods. One of the big things the gods really love it when an Imperial, especially a really devout one, so a priest, a sanctioned Psycher, a officer of the Imperial Guard, or, in my opinion, more than anything, members of the Ecclesiarchy. If you get a member of the Ecclesiarchy captured as a Chaos Force, oh my god, they're a VIP prisoners. Because you want to try, at your absolute best, to mentally break them. You want to weaken them, you want to break them, you want to absolutely corrupt them. Because not only does that serve as a symbol to the other people you're fighting, broadcast that, put it out on posters, live stream you torturing this person, And that is exactly what you want, what the Chaos Gods want, and what will scare the ever-living crap out of the enemy forces. Like, oh my goodness, that Sister of Battle is being strung up on the rack, and she's been, dismembered and flayed for hours on live TV. That's gonna affect people, and, of course, the gods love it. That is absolutely what they want. That's public. That draws the eye, the attention of the gods on you, and that's what cults want. They win when the eyes of the gods are on them, because even if they lose, there's a chance that they get that Hail Mary ritual off that they were trying for in the first place. Or there's a chance that other Chaos forces, like Space Marines, come in and join them. So, back to variety of units and assets. They have variety, but it's often subpar. So they might have tanks, but they're local. They might have APCs, but they're garbage. They might have artillery, but it's small. However, unlike the Guard, who are limited to using certain things in some areas and certain things in other areas, with little pieces of crossover here and there, Cultists can bring all of it to bear in one thing. So, we have 20 anti-aircraft guns, 20 thud guns, a few mortars, and a whole bunch of guys equipped with storm equipment. Instead of splitting them up and having an anti-air corps, an artillery corps, and a vehicle corps, all of them together. Everybody goes. Vehicles go in, artillery goes over, anti-aircraft, we roll that down, we shoot them with the heavy weapons. Combination fighting. It's a great plan, especially when you're limited in units and equipment. So here's that kind of, sorry, I'm moving on to the pictures. Here's our specialized unit of boys. They've all got body armor. You'll notice this. The difference between certain levels of Chaos Cultists is whether or not they have body armor. So these guys are clearly elite. They've all got auto guns. Most of them have special weapons in here. You can see shotguns, plasma guns, etc. Maybe that's a grenade launcher. I think it's a shotgun. These guys might be blood-packed. I can't really tell. They have the red uniforms. They have the scarred, super buff arms of the, Gorin Arcanate. But I can't really tell. These guys are a little bit more classic. You can see Plasma Gunner, 2 melee weapons here, a chainsword and a hammer. And this guy has one of my favorite weapons, a barbed wire wrapped pickaxe. And this is what I'm talking about, where I'm like, the Chaos Cultist is not equipped with necessarily military weapons of war. Of these 4 weapons that these gentlemen have, 2 of them are military weapons of war. The chainsword and the plasma gun. This dude has a hammer. And this guy has a pickaxe wrapped in barbed wire. Those are not military weapons. Those are industrial tools that they're repurposing. So, it isn't necessarily that you have to be like, well, I have 10,000 rifles. That means I can raise 10,000 men. No. Quite frankly, no. You can raid industrial areas of the planet and just be like, grab every sledgehammer, every hammer, every, maul or pick or, screwdriver for all I care. Grab everything with a sharp, pointy stick on the end, and that's a new armed cultist. When you have more manpower than you have weapons, start going for cheap weapons, because every single person that you can kill with a cheap weapon is going to get access to better weapons by looting the dead. So these guys, they might be part of a storm unit or an assault unit. You can see they have the body armor, they have the masks, a plasma gun, a chainsword. All this is elite stuff, but even for them, this kind of storm unit or storm squad, a hammer, a pickaxe, some sort of big heavy melee weapon that would be considered, uneconomical for a guardsman who's got to run all over the place and be very efficient. A cultist has no problem just swinging around a pickaxe and smashing someone in the face with it. And it works. It's not like because it's a primitive weapon, it doesn't kill the guardsmen. It still kills them. It still does, and pretty reliably. And a pickaxe covered in barbed wire, while fanciful and quite impressive, is also terrifying. I want to say this. A lot of the non-uniformity of Chaos weapons, they get looked at as like, oh, it's non-uniform. Look at that trash. Look at that garbage. It's unmaintained. That's terrifying. How scared would you be if a big, abbed-out, roided-out, masked man covered in skulls with an all-steel pickaxe starts swinging at you with this thing, and as it goes by and barely misses you, you look as a ring of barbed wire is wrapped around it? That's vicious. That's brutal. What if he hits your friend and stabs him and rips out a length of barb? I'd run. I'd be horrified of this. I would run for the hills. And a lot of the time, chaos weapons get judged for their ramshackle appearance or their industrial nature, people don't really factor in the horror of these things. Formations and unit types, and this will be another thing we go in depth with. Like I said, this is going to be a long video. Sit in. The uninitiated or the lost and the damned. These are the most generic cultists. They're the ones who are like in t-shirts. They'll have their faces covered with sackcloth or more of these like religious coverings and robes, almost like he's got a bird beak mask, which is, again, religious in origin. Standard cloth stuff. He doesn't really have any body armor, and he's equipped with a pretty simple short auto gun. These are what make up the kind of cheap garbage units. These ones are used for, defending rear areas. They're used for policing. They make up a large amount of that chaff or that, like, meat shield unit. And this is what I consider a vast majority of the dependent warbands. This is what their cultists are. They don't really get much better than this. They might get their hands on a better weapon, but body armor, equipment, auspex, anything electrical, anything special, maybe even a gas mask might be out of the question. Totally. It might just be outright not allowed, or they have to give it up. If I kill a guardsman, I can't take all of his stuff. I have to turn that over to my overlord, who might decide that I don't deserve it, or might decide that he's going to sell it. And it's like, well, I don't get to keep my own stuff. And the uninitiated in normal cults, they kind of make up the battle line during the early phases, but once we get into the real army phase, you'll see a lot more special units jumping up in addition to the uninitiated. So, no matter what the army, the uninitiated never go away. The lost and the damned never go away. These are like civilian-turned soldiers, they could be traitors, they could be any number of things, but in general they're held together by not having body armor, not having good equipment, and generally having subpar ranged weapons. And sometimes just melee weapons. Line troops. So I've marked the line troops as rare, but in true armies, they are the battle line. And you'll notice here some differences. The uninitiated, he's got a small, short-barreled autogun, he's got no other weapons. Look at the line trooper. He has a steel breastplate, a piece of body armor. He has a large, high-caliber, pretty modern-looking autogun. He has a grenade. He has melee weapons in addition to his standard weapon. He doesn't just have, a gun. He has a knife. He has a second knife back here, and or a sheath. I'm not sure. And then you can see as well, gas mask. He's got a backpack for his gas mask. He's got equipment. He's got a uniform, not this ragged ensemble of robes, which may be over some uniforms in the line troops, but line troops are what are expected to make up the resisting force. So they're the ones that you want to get as close to the Imperial Guard standards as you could possibly get. A PDF could quite easily say that if they turned chaos, they would be a line trooper if they had a decent level of supply. Because training, really, and the expectations of morale and things of that nature. So, the line troops include things like Pact Sun troops. They include Sons of Sec. They include the basic Tyrant's Legion. They include some of the upper level of the Black Legion cultists. We'll talk about the Black Legion in a bit, and how their cults work, and how they kind of... I shouldn't say how their cults work, but how they, as one of the most prolific and numerous cult societies and networks out there, how they tend to be more advanced. And I would talk about the Alpha Legion inserts and plants, but they technically don't form an army. Alpha Legion plants tend to just create cults and organize them again. So an Alpha Legion agent isn't necessarily going to fall into any of these categories outside of warlords, commanders, demagogues, or hyper-elites. And even then, they're not usually in open warfare as much as they can help it because they are squishy, unlike the Astartes. So, moving on from line troops, they're the line holders. They do a lot of different stuff in real armies that the uninitiated can't, including using special weapons and sometimes vehicles. Mutants, mobs, abhumans, shock troops, and monsters. So, I only have one image reference for this, but you can kind of see where I'm going with this. This is the flexible formation that makes up the gap between line troopers, who have, some body armor, some nice equipment, some decent infantry weapons, if they're needed at all. But in a more traditional cult, one that doesn't go down the army route as hard, you might have a whole bunch of uninitiated, these lost and damned, with a ranged weapon and no body armor, and then the mob, the mutant horde, the abhumans, these shock troops and creatures. You can see over here, he's big, he's got motley armor, he's got mutations, he's overflowing with mutations, he's strong, he's fat, he's durable, he's wearing some, mixed equipment, and he's wielding a massive axe. You know, you might say, well, just shoot him in the head. Just get rid of this. That's fine to say. These guys have a lot of shock value. They can run through lines, and they're so big and tough and durable and scary, they can kind of overwhelm a lot of forces, especially if they come on them out of surprise. So one of the reasons I put them as like mobs of shock troops is if you have a whole bunch of guys who are equipped with sledgehammers, and you throw in a couple of ogrins that you've corrupted, and you give those guys maybe some big picks or a couple of like hand blades and just tell them, go wild. You know, say the uninitiated fall back, the lost and the damned, they've lost their position, they're falling back in disarray. Fine, we'll collect them later, send in the mutant mob to fill the gap. And that's the thing of like, these aren't troops and forces that you can really train all that well, and they have a lot of issues with maintenance. So, does a mutant survive on its own for a long time? Maybe. Maybe. Not if there's extreme mutation to the point where they can't eat or breathe or sleep or function. At some point, you're just going to have to swear off certain mutated individuals and be like, alright man, you gotta go. You're going in the death brigade. You're either too insane or it's too hard to keep you alive medically, for us to keep you here as a soldier in reserve. So, you're off to the front lines, miss you won't miss you. And these tend to be not so regimented. So you might have, genuine human mutants, like a dude who's grown a third arm, or he has a bunch of eyes all over his head. Something that doesn't necessarily make him all that combat effective, or something that might make him combat effective, like I have tentacles for arms and they can grab people, or I have a massive jaw and teeth, I have a wolf face, I have some sort of animalistic mutation, or it's just like progressive skin cancer like this dude has. Something horrific and scary, but he's also big and strong and dumb and doesn't feel pain. All of those are going to be lumped in together, regardless of their actual mutations or anything, and they're just going to be told, go to point A and walk to point B, kill everything in your way. They're fodder, but they have way more hitting power than an uninitiated will. The uninitiated might have just ranged weapons, or even sometimes they might have just melee weapons, but that's not as common. But the mutants, the mobs, the abhumans, the shock troops, and monsters, they're going to have some more hitting power, and maybe, in theory, a little bit more staying power. A lot of these guys are going to be insane. Like, genuinely, clinically mad. They're going to be either indoctrinated, or so psychotic that they're not able to understand that they're being killed to the last man, and so they will fight to the last man. If you need to plug a gap, if you need to make up for an enemy advance, throwing a mass of crazy abhumans, or a big shock troop regiment, or a big shock troop, like, almost zoo at the enemy, and throwing a big old monster at them too, maybe some sort of possessed, or some, evil creature of the warp that you've managed to harness somehow, whether it's in a person or somewhere else. Throw that at them, let them deal with it. Maybe it takes them a few hours to kill all of them. Great, that's time to reinforce, that's time to move like line troops around to get a defense going, and it's time to corral the uninitiated back down, calm them down, get them re-engaged with the conflict, and be like, alright, cool, here's your new defensive line. Anyone who comes through here, you better not escape again, because I just used like 30,000 mutants to stymie the enemy offensive, essentially. They're not as effective against things like vehicles, but even then, you think an Ogren with a big steel pickaxe could probably put that through the side of like a Chimera and just go, punk, and smash a hole through it. Or you could equip them with something particularly devastating, like, I don't want to say you want to waste power weapons on this force, but where the other ones have maybe their sergeants have a chain weapon, or special weapon for the line troops. You can give mutants stuff like really big industrial tools, or theoretically you could give them heavy weapons if they're smart enough to know how to use them, or if they're crazy enough to not care to know how to use them and just use them anyway. It can be effective against a lot of different forces, but against heavy armor, about 90% of cults are going to struggle anyway. So as we go on to the hyper-elites, I have here the elites, the hyper-elites, the ultra-hyper-elites, heavy troops, vehicles, and Astartes, and then warlords, commanders, and demagogues. We will talk about them in turn. So, At the moment, the uninitiated, the line troops, and the mutants, mobs, abhumans, shock troops, etc., and the monsters. This also includes possessed. I don't talk about them as much because they're more of a fire and forget weapon than a troop. They have a demon inside of them. It makes them super durable. They're hard to get rid of, etc. Moving on. Elites, hyper elites, etc. These are the ones where we get into talking about making an Imperial Guard equivalent. Here we have what I would consider a standard squad of elite cult army. We have all these boys in their head coverings and their gas masks. Each of them you can see has a breastplate. And obviously they all have auto guns. And a couple of them you can see here actually have las weapons. So that's probably a las pistol. They have las guns on the back of the Chimera. They have a Chimera, number one, biggest thing. They have an armored vehicle that they're using to move around and deploy. And a las gun down here. What I also notice about this is, look at their weapons. We have ranged weapon, backup melee weapon, pistol, melee weapon. So these picks, these blades, or the knives they have at their hip, all that kind of stuff. I imagine that this guy is probably a sergeant. And then we have our heavy weapons guy in the front here. He's got a chain axe. You know, this is clearly elite. They all have auto guns. They all look pretty well trained. They have semi-uniforms that are all in that red color. These might be blood pack troops. You know, with anything that's a red uniform, it's questionable. I would say maybe, but probably not. For a couple of reasons that I won't get into until I talk about the blood pact for real. And this all screams elite to me. Armored, mechanized, protected with body armor, equipped pretty uniformly with good weapons, and then the biggest thing is they have access to those really special weapons. So in this case, it's a chain axe, and, you know, some melee weapons and a vehicle. In some cases, it might be plasma guns, autocannons, heavy weapons, all that stuff. But this is clearly an offensive force, an assault force. You can see it from the way that they have lighter auto guns. You can see the melee weapons. You can see the chain axe, obviously. And their sergeant is, you know, checking out the field, seeing where they can go now that their Chimera is damaged. And you can see that the squad is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. 11 guys. And maybe a couple more inside the Chimera. Elite forces in Chaos Cults are going to be really limited. They're going to work as bodyguards for the Demagogue. They're going to work as the absolute last line of defense. Or they might be split up and used as special forces. Now, what do I mean by special forces? How does that work in a Chaos Cult? If you have a job that needs doing, whether it's something that would be untenable for line troops, like they just don't have the training, the expertise, or sometimes even the loyalty, or whether it's something that you just really need done, like it's an absolute imperative that you capture this position or go after this thing. Having a unit in reserve that is the absolute cream of the crop, the elite, making sure that the enemy never sees your best, and then when you throw your best at them, then you know it's going to make an impact. You know, if they've been fighting line troops or the uninitiated for a couple of months, they might be like, alright, these guys, they're pushovers. We just got to throw a little bit of resistance at them, a couple grenades, a couple artillery barrages. They don't have the mechanization, they don't have the movement. And then Chaos hits you in the mouth with an absolute slap, and they come around with some mechanized unit of elites. You know, it might only be 10,000 strong. It might only be 1,000 strong, but still, the ability to surprise the Imperium will pay you massive dividends that can straight up win you campaigns in a lot of scenarios. So, elite forces and heavy forces are super important. Now, we move on to our 4 pictures here. And weapons, equipment, and general unique stuff. So, here we have a couple of examples of demagogues and, you know, relations here. So, where you saw with the elites, they could have a lot of melee weapons, they could have special weapons like chainsword, maybe even power swords, and vehicles. Elites and demagogues are going to have the absolute cream of the crop. So you can see here, power sword, specialized melee weapon with this little chain thing. He's in carapace, essentially, maybe even, yeah, this would definitely be light carapace in my opinion, because he's got the overcoat and then the big plates. Then over here, you have kind of this squad of diehards, this group, with their kind of Death Watch-looking demagogue. He's got all this extra gubbins on him. He's got a pistol, knife, all this stuff, body armor, clearly. And then the other thing is cults that are led by Psychers and Psychers in cults. They exist, they do things, they are soldiers, they're generally unstable, so the worst ones are kind of used like living bombs, and the best ones are kept under lock and key and used for rituals and things like that. Ones in the middle might be used as combat Psychers or tactical Psychers. Not a ton of forces do that, but, plenty of them are capable of it, even if they don't like to do it or they choose not to do it because it's dangerous. Doesn't mean they're incapable. And then finally over here we have Urlach Gower. Urlach Gower is the leader of the Blood Pact after the death of Archon Nadzibar, who, by the way, is the person that this series and all of my Warhammer series are based off of. I, in this capacity, act as Archon Nadzibar, telling you about my armory, my enemies, and my weapons. So just little thing there, why it's called Archon's Armory and Archon's Armies. It's Archon Nadzibar, who was the leader of the Blood Pact before Urlach Gower, or rather, he was stepping in to give orders to Gower, who was in charge of the Blood Pact anyway. So, questionable how that power dynamic worked. But you can see here, Gower eventually gets his hands on actual power armor. He takes his kind of ceremonial armor that you have here, this Feral World plate with all of its cuts and jags and stuff, and he suits it up into legit power armor that he essentially models off of a stolen Space Marine kit. So the theory goes. We haven't actually got any details on that, but the art and the information that we have, he's in power armor. And it still has the same kind of general outline as this art of his, original Feral World plate. But you can kind of see, Warlords will have unique, idiosyncratic, weird weapons and equipment. They are wild. They do all kinds of stuff that are unexpected, and they range in combat capacity and capability. I would not tangle with Urlach Gower. He is blessed of the Blood God before ever he started the actual crusade in the name of chaos. He is probably stronger, outside of their armor, man to man, than the average Space Marine. He is so yoked up on chaos juice that he swings around insanely oversized weapons with one darn hand. Like, his main armament is literally an eviscerator chainsword made for a Space Marine, and he can use it with one hand, basically. Horrifying. The man is unbelievably strong. But then you get down to here. This is like a mining revolt. We have our guy here. He covers his face. He doesn't really look all that blessed. There's no mutations here. There's only a little bit of chaos iconography. So the relation between him and the gods in terms of blessings, probably not all that strong. Obviously, this gentleman has maybe a bit too strong of a relationship with the gods. He's got 3 faces and a bunch of horns growing out of them. So you can girl boss too close to the sun as a chaos demagogue and get yourself killed, corrupted, or otherwise driven mad. But you want to find a nice little happy medium. Unlike Astartes, you won't live forever. One of the things with chaos corruption is, I say you won't live forever. One of the baseline blessings that the chaos gods give with high levels of chaos corruption is basically immortality. And we see this a lot of the time with the chaos forces in the Sanguinary Worlds. Nadzibar is 95 years old when he starts the invasion into the Sabbat Worlds. He's basically 120-something when he dies. And he's still a very terrifying melee combatant at 130 years old almost. He and Slato are almost the same age when they die together. So, immortality, living forever, or at least not suffering aging, is absolutely a byproduct of certain levels of chaos corruption. We see this in many instances, but it also gives a reason as to why, apparently if Marines can age, even if they age slowly, the Chaos Marines don't seem to have done so, and the answer would be, Chaos's first blessing is, yeah, old age isn't going to take you from us. You're going to keep serving until you fail. And failure means death, most of the time. Or loss of favor, which may as well be death. So, Weapons and equipment, almost anything they can grab. Las guns are preferred, obviously, because of what we talked of in the las gun video. They are a guarantee of continued resistance. But power weapons, chain weapons, those are going to go to the hyper elites or to the demagogue themselves. You know, you're not going to find 30 or 40 chain swords just lying around somewhere unless you're taking a guard recruitment world or attacking a good manufactorum or something like that. Something where it's going to be produced on world or it's stored there for the guard. You're not going to find a ton of those special weapons. You might grab them from time to time, like some noble might be like, oh yes, my family chainsword, or my heirloom power sword. When chaos takes over, yes, say goodbye to your heirloom. That's going to the demagogue or his right-hand man, so that when he has to fight a space marine with his bare hands, he's got a power sword to do it with instead of, you know, a regular sword. So, yeah, that's the general stuff. Unique, obviously, Chaos likes to mess around with logic, so weapons that don't make sense, weapons that are blessed, weapons that are literally enchanted. Like, I'm not talking enchanted like, you know, oh, it's mastercrafted. No, I mean literal magic in the weapons. I'm talking chain swords that light on fire. I'm talking power swords that never run out of ammunition, or never run out of fuel, and burn so hot that they, like, spit flames like a lightsaber. Crazy stuff like that gets into the hands of Chaos Demagogues, and some of the elite forces as well. So, famous groups and logistics. Over here we have the Blood Pact and or members of the Zhou Sanguinary. This would be what I would consider line troops. Look, lasgun, melee weapon, grenades, body armor, and his lovely face mask. Such a nice piece of art. Severan Dominant. This gentleman here, the Severan Dominant have a very, like, Roman legionary type feel to them. You can see here this gentleman has a hotshot lasgun. Yeah, because, look, there's no wire to it. It's clearly beefed up to be a hotshot. I didn't make this very clear in the lasgun video, so I'm just going to go over it real quick. It is not wired, or it might have a wire here at the back, but it clearly takes magazines. So these would be Type 4 magazines. You can see more of them that he has there. And it's beefed up, and it's designed to work and function as a lasgun that takes magazines. So this one might be wired, but if you took the wire off and you still use the magazine, pretty good chance that this would count as a hell gun, as a hotshot lasgun, and maybe also as a hell gun. I can't really tell. Again, I'd have to turn this guy around, and I can't. So, they are the followers of Duke Severus. Obviously, the Blood Pact, they're part of the Sanguinary Worlds. They, not rebel, but they moved to take back the lands that were taken by the Imperium during the Saints' Crusade. The Severan Dominant, they follow Duke Severus in his path of heresy against the Imperium. There's several worlds. They're supplied pretty well. The Chaos Forces of the Blood Pact, they kind of take everything they can, and then they take Forge Worlds and Manufactorums that start making them real legit weapons, like new lasguns. The Severan Dominant kind of had that from the start. There's a lot of Traitor Guard regiments in there, and a lot of forces that were like, oh, the old PDF? Yeah, we upgunned them with lasguns, and now they're the equivalent of regular guardsmen. And then the Tyrant's Legion. Tyrant's Legion are kind of a similar thing to the Severan Dominant. They're an example of a dependent cult, or a dependent group of line troops that are, you know, they rely on Astartes to get most of the heavy lifting done, because Lufthuron and the rest of the Red Corsairs, as they would come to be known, they organize these guys as a de facto Imperial Guard Regiment / Planetary Defense Force, where they can have resistance, and then they rely on the Astartes to come back them up. But the Tyrant's Legion, super nice. I love them. Everyone always forgets about them because, you know, they're not really talked about a ton, but I love them because they're essentially a Chaos Guard Regiment, full stop. They don't worship the Imperium. They don't serve. They serve the Tyrant. They serve the Tyrant of Badab during the Badab War, and afterward, they still serve the Tyrant. They just become cultists, essentially, or they're killed. But, yeah, a majority of them would still probably serve as Tyrant's Legion if they were around in the 41st millennium, with a Lufthuron and the rest of the Astral Claws / Red Corsairs. The Black Legion Cultists. So I don't have a picture of this because they're kind of just generic, but the Black Legion is the largest conglomeration of Space Marines as far as we know in terms of chaos. They have Marines from all different legions. They have massive amounts of, you know, equipment and supplies and clout, and they raise huge armies of cultists. We're talking in the tens of millions, if not the hundreds of millions, and occasionally, if you were to move them all together, maybe in the billions. You know, large numbers. This is where I get to a point where I'm like, I don't think they are equipping all of their cultists to the same equivalent level. Not only would that be stupid to do, just because, well, why am I making a bunch of trashy autoguns when I could actually, in a Demon Forge world that I control, I could make them decent weapons. I could make them decent armor. And I'm the Black Legion. I have many more Astartes than some random warband that needs to worry about their cultists overthrowing them, or killing them, or resisting them. Why not give them better equipment? So I think that the Black Legion cultists actually have a pretty solid chance of, A, keeping spoils from the battlefield. You know, I killed a guy with a plasma gun. Cool, I get a plasma gun now. Unless some Astartes wants to literally rip it out of my hands. You know, unlike a smaller cult that might be like, everything that you touch, another Marine has to grab it, otherwise you're not allowed to have it, or they'll shoot you. So the Black Legion, I could see them running kind of like a pirate build, where they're like, yar har me matey, every single person that we kill is a little buff to our loot table, and we can form better fighting forces because of it. That's just a theory. It just comes to me because they have both the stability and the numbers and the constant need for weaponry that they could reasonably produce and, you know, keep to that level of readiness. The Mobian Sixth, they are from Darktide. I really like this cult, even if they're not, like, from a book or anything, because they demonstrate two sides of a cult working together. They have the religious angle where they worship Nurgle, and they get people on their side as, like, planetary defenders, but they seduce the gangs. They get the industry masters to work for them, and they're a traitor guard regiment at their very heart. So a traitor guard regiment, mixed with a religious uprising, mixed with this kind of gang affiliation or these like waster affiliations, they're super cool. And you can also see what I mean when I talk about, you know, elite versus special versus uninitiated. The Dreg guys, the guys who are like gangsters or kind of PDF troopers, those are the uninitiated. They don't have any body armor. They have basically just some ranged weapons, and that's it. Then you get to the actual Mobian Sixth, who have flak armor, who have metal armor, who have better melee weapons for the assault troops, and who have las guns for the normal troops. Those are your line holders. And then we get up above, they have mutants, and they have poxhounds, and they have dogs, and they have all types of, you know, horrible creatures that they unleash upon the player. Boom, there's your mutant horde. Great example. And then we get up to the real elites, and then we talk about kind of the maulers with their chain axes, and we talk about the flamethrower units and the snipers and all that stuff. You know, those specialist units are either going to be counted as the elite, like the Carapace armored gunner troops, or they're going to count as specialist units, like genuine solo specialists, which are pretty cool and a great example of how a traitor guard regiment can draw a cult around itself to insulate it from losses that it doesn't need to take. Logistics, generics, and standards. So going from the bottom up, there are almost no standards within the cult army. Between or within individual cult groups, there may be standards. You know, we all use this. It's our standard weapon. We need to use this so that it remains consistent. You know, we all use lasguns. We want to be a guard standard. After Urlach Gower takes over the Blood Pact, he reforms them to be almost a one-to-one copy with the Imperial regimental system, except he organizes them in such a way that they can benefit from combined arms tactics pretty much on their own. So that type of stuff is probably the only consistent standard, other than a lot of forces that are up to the level of an army will try and equip their people with the basics, with body armor, with a helmet, with some sort of uniform, even if it's just a uniform color, that they can dye their equipment and their weaponry, and their clothes, obviously. And it can go all the way up to things like everybody has the same bayonet type, or everyone has the same of this or that. That's on the very far away end. That's on the Severin Dominant Blood Pact scale. And kind of the Tyrant's Legion as well. So, generics. When we talk about all these specialist people and units, all these named people, we also have to think about what a generic cult would look like. They might have a couple of, you know, specialty weapons, but they're not going to be hell guns or bolt guns or las guns. It's going to be things that they're going to find lying around. If they're on a mining world, They might have flame weapons because, I don't know, why would you have a flamethrower lying around an industrial area? To heat stuff up, to burn metal, any type of those things. A blowtorch could theoretically be retrofitted into a flamethrower. There you go, fire weapons. A planet that has artillery, they might have artillery. Another thing that is often the case, if you have planets that have a lot of industrial tools, so mining worlds, penal colonies, anything like that, even farming worlds, or we haven't really talked about them a lot, but feudal worlds and low technology worlds, swords, scythes, sledgehammers, picks, axe rakes, and all of those kinds of weapons are going to be pretty generic. You might be like, wow, this cult's really well armed with melee weapons. No, they're from a mining world, and they had enough pickaxes on hand to give everyone a pickaxe. So the basic generic weapon for them is a pickaxe. So that's kind of the thing with that. It's like, what's available, and what can we take, and, of what value is it? If a planet doesn't produce a lot of weapons, they're going to have to make do with what they have. Logistics. So this is going to be the longest one, and this is why, this is the last slide coming up. Logistics of Chaos Armies. In terms of food, I'm just going to go from the bottom up here. In terms of food, they're going to be provided for either by the overall command structure, so their commander is going to be like, alright, civilians, start planting crops, or start harvesting and storing the crops. My men need to eat. Because the Chaos Force does need to eat just as much as any Guards Force does, so food, all of that stuff is probably going to be local, or it's going to be from storages, like I said. Those storages with good rationing can last anywhere between 3 years and like a decade. So more than enough time to start trying to organize a local food production source. Uniforms. Uniforms for Chaos Armies aren't always going to be of the nice flak weave that Imperial Guard forces have. So they're not going to be body armor on their own. It is often just going to be a shirt or a robe or some sort of thing of that nature. Again, that's going to be local. Weapons, they're going to be a mix. So, like I said, there are some fire and forget weapons that cults have that they use because they can't maintain them. So, a warband, for example, that takes a self-propelled artillery gun, they're going to want to use it as quickly as possible because what if a gear breaks? What if the ammunition goes bad? What if the vehicle runs out of fuel? What if our men don't know how to use it and they accidentally damage it? I can't afford to be relying on this piece of technology or on this piece of equipment if I can't maintain it. And, they're just going to have to use it and lose it. Use it or lose it, and use it or use it or lose it, or use it and then lose it. So there might be some one-shot weapons like Possessed kind of come into this area. Some mutants like Spawn might come into this area. It's like, well, we have 5 Chaos Spawn. We've been keeping them in captivity, essentially. Use them now. Drop them down onto the planet, cause some chaos. Same thing with Possessed. It's like, well, we have one. He's kind of ready to get possessed and to get let loose. Let's just see what he can do. That's on the more esoterical end. On the more literal end, when it comes to who can equip and maintain forces, for dependent forces, ones that are in the warp, ones that are working with Chaos Space Marines, that kind of stuff, theoretically the Marines, of course, can use their own technology and their own abilities to supply their troops, but as mentioned, they generally won't. They don't need to if they're doing their job and attacking enough planets. They're going to pretty much rely on their troops figuring it out for themselves. Then the other big two are the Iron Warriors and the Dark Mechanicus. Apart from local production, where you go onto a world, you conquer it as a cult, independent of any other forces, or with the assistance of other forces, you take their production, you continue making firearms, vehicles, equipment, you take a forge world, you take an industrial world, you take a manufacturing world, and you just continue letting the world do what it was doing before. You don't cause too much of a ruckus, you don't make everyone worship the devil in their minds, but, start slow, start out slow, get the factories working again after the Civil War is over, and you can be a little bit more confident that you're going to have 1,000 rifles come spring. But yeah, where you can't get local, these two forces come in. The Iron Warriors tend to produce stuff that is a lot more high grade, but they produce it in more limited quantities. Why is that? Because the Dark Mechanicus are more spread out, because they're more independent, because they work in the shadows of the warp, they don't necessarily have the same monomaniacal single image idea of what should be done. You could get a group from a Trader Forge world or from a Forge world in the warp, and they might be like, huh, this cult is doing pretty okay, and they contacted us through the warp via an astropath that they need weapons and equipment. What can they offer? Do they have slaves? Great! This planet has a population of 3 billion. Every human being that you give us will give you a gun. I truly believe that a vast interconnected system exists within the Dark Mechanicum that is effectively supplying a ton of warbands and a bunch of cults with equipment and weapons and gear in exchange for people, in exchange for relics and technology, in exchange for members of the Mechanicus who get captured, turning over an adept to the Dark Mechanicum so that they can, mind break him and steal all of his secrets. That's probably going to win you a couple of tanks. Maybe it's going to get you something nice like the phone number of a Space Marine warband. That's a great deal. Because not only can those Space Marines help you out, they might be able to actually help you with the restoring and the repairing and maintenance of some of your equipment. More likely, they're going to just claim ownership over you and use you as warband serfs, but there's always the chance that they'll be friendly, right? It isn't actually a terrible chance, because cults are really big, and Chaos Space Marines want to use them and not abuse them, because then they will lose them. So, on one side you have the Dark Mechanicus, this kind of wide net. They have varying different levels of expertise and capability. Some of them are just on, forge ships or foundry ships. They go around the galaxy into little areas that have resources. They steal those resources. They make deals with people, okay, we're going to teach you how to make firearms on your little backward planet. In exchange, we need a whole bunch of people because we're about to do a ritual to bind a demon into a knight on another planet. They have this almost mafia, like a tech mafia style deal where they're like, alright, guys, you give us something, we give you something. Some sort of backroom dealing is definitely how I see a lot of the Dark Mechanicus going down. On true Demon Forge worlds, it's more official. You make offers, you haggle, you deal in money, in favors, in missions, in ransoms, but a lot of the time you're also going to see people be like, oh yeah, you need like 5,000 men, and in exchange, you'll provide us with a couple hundred rifles each year? Deal. I just took over a hive world. I have a dearth, a plethora of men to give you. Take them, Dark Mechanicus. And as I said, the other one is going to be the Iron Warriors and forces like the Iron Warriors. I don't mean to single them out as if they're the only force that makes this, but for Chaos's needs of producing really, really high quality, really, really fancy things, without having to resort to the more far away and the more complicated and expensive dealings with the real Demon Forge worlds, the Iron Warriors are a good second choice. Why? The Iron Warriors have warbands in a lot of different locations. Yes, most of them are on Mendringard, but we also know that a ton of them are just all over the galaxy. They raid, they attack, they do actions in the Imperium that require retaliation, which means that they are actively in the zone where cults can ask for help. They can go, hey, Iron Warriors, you guys are Marines that aren't completely insane, and you know how to do business with people. Can you come down and help us modernize our industry? You know how to make Space Marine power armor, and you know how to make hell guns and bolt guns and all this stuff that, even the biggest of Demon Forge worlds, they might either struggle or have some sort of blocker to making all these things. Again, you can make most things in the warp if you have a true Demon Forge world, but, there are limitations. Quality, use outside of the warp, use in the hands of normal humans. Some things are dangerous for uncorrupted people to touch, and Demon Forge worlds tend to not care about that. I don't want my infantrymen to pick up their new weapons and suddenly become insane or get cancer and become mutants. I don't want that to happen, and the Iron Warriors, as cold and calculating and brutal as they are, they are a little bit more understanding of what it takes to actually equip an army than an insane tech priest 10 million miles away in the Eye of Terror. So, an Iron Warriors warband can provide for you, but the toll might be just as high, if not equal to that of a Demon Forge World or a random Dark Mechanicus sect. The Iron Warriors might be like, alright, you want us in charge of industry? We're running the show now. You might be nominally in charge, but we're the Iron Warriors. We don't take orders. We're not going to listen to you, and if you tick us off too much, we'll leave. Or if you really tick us off, or if you tick us off and we think that we can do the job better than you, we'll just usurp you, and all of a sudden, boom, another Tyrant's Legion pops up, where it's like, oh, that cult came under the control of the Iron Warriors, and they still maintained a human army? How weird. Like, cultists that get to the level of an army using these two logistical mainframes, in addition to local production, they don't tend to just degenerate when they get taken over or when they get co-opted or change leadership. They can, but that generally doesn't happen unless they're kind of, space-bound all the time. If it's on a world, the Iron Warriors or any force that usurps the cult leader, even if it's another cult leader, is going to maintain the current military because it was what we were working towards to begin with. So I hope that significant portion of this video explains what I mean by the logistics of Chaos Armies. They're going to be provided in one of three ways. Local production, either modified or straight up war production from a world. In addition to stuff stored and stolen, that's taken from defeated enemies, ripped off of equipment or static positions, etc. And then the Iron Warriors, or just generic warband that has production capability. They're going to provide you with more special things, they can optimize things more personal for your troops, and they might be offering you a bit more of a bargain or a deal because they might have less pull than the Dark Mechanicus. And then Dark Mechanicus are going to come in two sizes, either the little forge ships or the little sects of, like, chaos tech priests kind of deal, where they're like, oh yeah, of course we'll help you out, but we're going to need to, like, install ourselves into your society and organize thralls and groups of people to help us out. Or you make a deal with a genuine Chaos Forge world somehow. It's not too hard. They do send out representatives to, like, other Chaos forces and are like, hey, we have services that we can offer you in exchange for things, because we need things, we need resources, we need people. Kind of hard to get that sometimes in the warp. And that's the third way. Alright. Acknowledgements. Goodness, what a long video. We will capture it for chaos! Chaos Jan. Cornbread. Bread for the bread god. Joining the cult may not be the best choice, but it's the chance you've got to take. What a horrible, horrible pun. I love it. Please note, new vote on the way. Thank you all for your patience. It's been a trying day. I have just finished some of my last work, and I am absolutely wiping it off my brow, and I'm ready to keep going. Y'all have been great. I've seen so much interest in this video. I really want to get this out, but here's the big part. Here's what comes next. New vote, people. New vote. Power weapons, chain weapons, miscellaneous human weapons, and I will do two parts. One for the human weapons or the miscellaneous weapons that I think are important, and then naturally I'm going to ask everyone at the end of that video any weapons that they want included, and then that will be the next video where I do a part 2 of exotic weapons, and I give you all the ones that you guys wanted and I didn't go into enough. So, again, going over it. Power weapons, powered weapons, it's going to include everything from lightning weapons to, actual power, slicing weapons. Chain weapons, all the variants, how to use them. I'm going to include a lot of the dueling rules between weapons in the chain weapon video as well. Miscellaneous human weapons, that's going to be both ranged and melee. It's going to include a lot of stuff, things like needle guns, things like Volkite, stuff like that. That's going to all be in there. And then that's going to also be a two-part video. The first one is going to be for the ones that come to mind for me, the ones that are most important. And then anything that I forget, I will leave it up to you guys in the comments, and I will make a part 2 with all the suggestions and things that I missed. And then the last option in the poll, other than, of course, the other one, which will be for anyone to recommend future video types, is regiment types and estimates, making an Imperial Guard regiment, and a basic kit. So, this is going to be another long video if we pick this one. It's probably going to take me more than a week to actually do, but Regiment types could be a video in and of itself, but since they're all kind of universal, I'm going to be talking about making an Imperial Guard regiment and the equipment needed to make a basic regiment, bare minimum, this is what you need to make a regiment, and then all the types. But the more important thing is I'm going to be giving you my baseline for how many people are in a regiment, and what they're equipped with in terms of, like, gear. So, how many thousands of men are in an infantry regiment? What's the range of an infantry regiment? What's a good example of light versus medium versus heavy infantry? How does heavy and mechanized and motorized, how do they change? How many Bane Blades are in a super heavy regiment? All that type of stuff I'll go over in that video. Like I said, it's going to be a long one. It's going to be in-depth. And it's definitely going to be a lot more of me taking the lore on the chin and then having to interpret it for everyone as a baseline, rather than me being like, oh, let me read off a list of statistics. Because, believe me, the numbers for regiments range ridiculously, and I am having to justify and kind of hash out the numbers here a lot on my own. So, there are your options. You'll see them in the community tag, but otherwise, it's been an absolute pleasure, and I wish you all a very good